Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack 3 absolutely chilling accounts that prove the feeling of control in our daily lives, well, it's often just a terrifying illusion. The situations we're about to explore, brought to life here with some pretty incredible full realistic graphics, are nightmares that can happen to literally anyone. Seriously, what happens when the people we trust, the professionals we hire, or even just strangers we date completely turn our perfectly normal lives upside down? Let's get into it. Okay, so I want you to ask yourself a question that, honestly, most of us just brush off. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? You know the feeling. We usually chalk it up to paranoia, right? We tell ourselves it's nothing, but how would you react if that creeping paranoia turned out to be a living, breathing reality? Story 1, The Woods. Our first source details the story of Sue. She was this ambitious young business owner just trying to get her company off the ground. After running out of initial funding, she accepted startup capital from a regular at her bar named Steve. Now, at first, he seemed like a wealthy, supportive friend, right? Just a guy offering to fund her dream. But the reality was a horrific bait and switch. Almost immediately after handing over the cash, Steve became intensely abusive. I mean, blowing up her phone 24/7. He even stalked her on dates. At one point, he actually walked right up and physically knocked out a man she was having drinks with. And then, out of nowhere, Steve just vanished. For years, he was completely off the radar, and her life finally seemed normal again. But that illusion of safety completely shattered years later. Sue began hearing footsteps outside her new home. And then came a hooded figure, just standing there, knocking on her door in the dead of night at 2 a.m. Terrified, but absolutely determined to finally pay Steve back and sever ties forever, Sue hires a private investigator to track this ghost down. And what the investigator actually uncovers? It is the stuff of absolute nightmares. The PI stakes out her house, and sure enough, the hooded figure returns right at 2 a.m. But when the PI steps out of his car, the figure sprints away into a heavily wooded area nearby. The next morning, the PI tracks the footprints and discovers a tiny, foul-smelling, abandoned shed hidden deep in those trees. Inside that shed, among rotting food wrappers, the investigator found a terrifying scene. He reported seeing a wheelchair with a mannequin sitting in it. The head was slightly beaten up and covered with makeup and a blonde wig, holding an old photograph of Steve and Sue right in its lap. When the police arrived, the hooded man returned. And yeah, it was Steve. He had lost all his money and was living like a wild animal in the woods, literally talking to this twisted effigy of Sue. It's just a stark, terrifying reminder that someone you consider a friend can harbor a genuinely monstrous obsession. Story 2, The Basement Trap. This next case perfectly proves how quickly our own paranoia can be weaponized against us. After peer pressure convinced him his fiancée was cheating, our narrator let those toxic thoughts just take over. He sought answers in the darkest corners of the internet, specifically Craigslist. Now, he was expecting a slick, professional, James Bond-style investigator. Instead, he meets a tall, sweaty guy named Shane in beat-up sweatpants at a local park, and Shane brought his completely unprofessional girlfriend along. Despite every single alarm bell ringing in his head, the narrator ignores his own instincts, hands over a wad of untraceable cash, and hires them anyway. It really shows how easily the illusion of control shatters when paranoia takes the wheel. It's the anatomy of a massive mistake, a whole sequence of terrible, isolating decisions. A full week goes by with no word from Shane. Then, suddenly, at 1:16 in the morning, the narrator gets a text claiming vital information has been found. The text demands he come to a specific address immediately with the rest of the cash. So the narrator actually drives to the address, and it's an abandoned, pitch-black house. He texts Shane from the car and receives this blood-chilling reply. The door's unlocked. Just open the door and come inside. Against all logic, driven entirely by his desperate obsession with finding out the truth, he actually walks through that front door. Once inside, he's just standing there in the pitch black. Then another text comes through. I hear you upstairs, we're in the basement. Just go to the door on the far left and come on down. The narrator slowly opens the basement door and finds himself staring down into a completely lightless, dark abyss. There's no office down there, just darkness. As he stands paralyzed at the top of those stairs, his phone buzzes one last time. Are you coming down, or are you just going to stand there all night? Thankfully, and I mean thankfully, his survival instincts finally overpowered his paranoia at the absolute last possible second. He turned around, sprinted back to his car, and drove off, narrowly escaping what was undeniably a horrific trap set by complete strangers who now had his home address. Story 3. The Gray SUV. Let's look at 2020, when a woman attempts to re-enter the dating pool. She goes on a few dates with a handsome, seemingly charming man named Wade. But she senses a really unsettling vibe from him, so she trusts her gut, cuts ties, and moves on. But Wade, he didn't move on. The walls rapidly begin closing in on her. It starts out pretty subtly, with a gray SUV parked outside her house. But by the weekend, there's a tall man in sunglasses just staring at her outside the grocery store. Later, she's on a brand new date with a guy named Paul at a coffee shop, and she notices that exact same tall man sitting in the corner. Finally, that evening, the SUV blatantly tails her car all the way to her driveway. Completely terrified, she and Paul call the police. The cops approach the man in the SUV, and in a truly shocking twist, they come back and tell her that the man is actually not a criminal at all. He's a fully licensed private investigator. It turns out Wade couldn't accept rejection, so he engaged in what is legally known as stalking by proxy. Basically, he manipulated a professional investigator into tracking her every move by feeding him a completely fake story. Interestingly enough, the source notes that the PI actually realized something was wrong eventually. He warned Wade that she was single and he needed to back off, and even told the police that Wade was unstable. But as we know, a restraining order is really just a piece of paper, and the threat was far from over. The whole situation reaches a violent climax weeks later. She's out hiking in a state park with Paul, finally starting to feel safe again, when suddenly Wade himself sprints out of the woods screaming at her, grabbing her arm and accusing her of being unfaithful. If it wasn't for Paul bravely tackling Wade to the ground, the outcome could have been fatal. Wade completely vanished after that, deleting his entire digital footprint, leaving her to forever look over her shoulder. Lessons in paranoia. Through this explainer, we've seen how everyday situations, whether it's an investment, a relationship doubt, or just a casual date, can completely shatter the comfortable illusion of control we all rely on. So let's review the critical psychological takeaways here. First up, manipulative individuals often disguise control as generosity. Never accept help that comes with strings attached. Second, your desire for answers should never, ever override logic. Please don't let paranoia drive you to shady, untraceable online transactions. And finally, trust your innate survival instincts over societal politeness. If a vibe feels off, it usually is. Ultimately, these stories leave us with one deeply unsettling thought about the extreme fragility of our own safety. Ask yourself, are you really the one in control of your life, or are you just lucky the trap hasn't sprung yet? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.